So today we're going to be talking about element 1, process safety culture. We're going to cover why this particular topic is important, how you can identify whether you have a gap in this area, and then how you might start to plan to close any gaps that you identify during your gap assessment. I'm going to go through our mission. So our mission is to show you some simple methods of how you can manage process safety management. And the reason is because when we start to talk about process safety, it's not as straightforward as occupational safety. And because it has quite a big technical element, a lot of people can get lost in process safety. So if we can make it simple, why not, right? Our primary goal is to provide a completely new perspective on process safety management. This allows you to systematically identify where your gaps are and then to close them. I'll warn you now, this is not going to be a 5-minute process. It is something that takes diligence and dedication, but I can assure you that it pays off. If you pay attention to process safety, it's good for business as well as good for making sure everybody gets home and you don't damage the environment. The secondary goal is to provide an evidence-based perspective on human factors. So often in some investigations, we see that the cause was human error. Operator did the wrong thing. Well, actually, even when the cause isn't classified as human error, for example, it's a design error, that actually also is a human error because the designer is likely to have been a human because we haven't mastered the art of computers designing our plants yet. And even potentially if it's an instrument failure, it could be as a result of the person who calibrated the instrument, potentially when he manufactured the instrument, they made a mistake when they did that, and that could be the reason for failure. But unless it's something very specific like that, we really want to be asking, why did that even happen in the first place? What's behind that? And if we stop at the human part, we lose a load of learnings. And so what we want to emphasize in this program is that if you stop at the human part, you're missing out, because all that you'll do is you may eliminate that one human or that one human error, but there's a whole system behind that that allowed that error to happen in the first place. And also the second thing is that if you continue to, if the buck keeps stopping at the person who made the mistake, people will become scared to report anything when they make a mistake because they'll feel like they might be blamed, there might be some punishment associated with it, and it doesn't provide a very good environment for open, honest reporting. And what you really want when you're managing process safety is to see the early warning signs. And as we'll see through this program, they're not as easy to see the early warning signs as it is for occupational safety, but there are early warning signs, and unless you have an open atmosphere for people to report them, you'll miss those, and instead you'll end up with the ones which can't be kind of brushed under the carpet, as you might say. So why would we be talking about culture, right? Culture prevents lessons from being implemented efficiently. Okay, so I mean, you can have the best procedure, the best lessons learned, but if the culture in your organization is one that, well, that can't happen here because we're too wonderful, or I know everybody on this shift and I know they won't make that type of mistake, well, then you're not going to be able to learn from anybody else's mistakes because you already have a mindset that that can't happen here. And there are many different aspects to culture which can prevent you from learning from the past. The very best sites with most mature process safety cultures have consistently shown it's possible to run a facility without losses across the duration of their lifespan and across a range of external regulatory standards and oil prices. So that's from the MARSH report. It is possible to run your site without an incident, but as I mentioned before, it takes diligence, and it takes actually everybody on the facility to know their role in process safety and to perform that role when it's required. And to be able to enable that, you have to have a really good culture which is supported by management and is supported by competent people at all levels in the organization. If you have one level where there's an insufficient competency and you're not mitigating that by improving training, having additional oversight, you have a weak link, and it doesn't matter how good the rest of your process is, that one can fall down. So having the support and the culture in place, that really helps you actually implement whatever good efforts you've put into the rest of your system. So this is the first time we're seeing this slide, so I'm just going to run through it a little bit. There are 20 elements here. I'm not going to ask you to count them, but just trust me. There's 20 elements across here. We're going into our first one here, which is process safety culture. And this is taken from both the Energy Institute and the CCPS, use the structure here. It's showing you that you have your process safety management system at the top. And in support of that, you have these 20 pillars. And you can see that we have some foundations at the bottom. So these have then been grouped into subsections. And the section that we're on at the moment is commit to process safety. So the first one we're going to go through is process safety culture. You can have a little snip of what's going to come up, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. So what is process safety culture? It's developing, sustaining, and enhancing the organization's process safety culture is one of the 5 elements in Commit to Process Safety pillar. Process safety culture has been defined as the combination of group values and behaviors that determine the manner in which process safety is managed. More succinct definitions include how we do things around here, what we expect here, how we behave when no one is watching. Investigations of catastrophic events such as Longford gas plant explosion and the Piper Alpha disaster have identified common process safety culture weaknesses that are often factors in other incidents. Okay, so how do we understand this? So I suppose one way to look at it is, if you're out with your friends at the pub or the bar, you might behave quite differently to how you might behave, say, when your mom's there and you're going out for a meal with her for Mother's Day. Now, you're the same person, but the behaviors of the group in those two scenarios are quite different, and that influences your behavior. So when you join an organization at work, I mean, we're all people, and this is still a group, and they're still behaving in a certain way. You will be influenced by how the people around you behave. If they all say, oh, you know, that procedure's out of date and we don't have to follow it, at the beginning you may resist, but if you continue to resist, you'll be seen as one of the outcasts. And so in an effort to try and fit in, you may subconsciously, maybe not purposely, but start to imitate their behavior so that you can fit in with the group. So it's really important to have set up and have this element where you have really good process safety culture, because that, even if there's a bad actor, the peer pressure from the group will encourage them to bring up their performance to the others. So let's review element number 1, the gaps to solve dashboard and how to use action worksheets. So I'll give you a minute for this. We've got the manager here, our engineer, and our management consultant. We've hired the Dogwork public relations firm to help us with one of our exploding phone problems. We have 2 choices. We can either recall all of the phones, or we can convince people that having one ear is cool. Recalls are expensive. Okay, then Van Gogh strategy it is. So you can see that there is one person in the room to which this idea is completely out of sorts. And sometimes I've sat in rooms where I've seen a problem and everybody else seems like they're talking a different language. And the example that I'm going to go through today, I hope will kind of show you what I mean, where you might be able to see something, but the culture of the place isn't allowing other people to sort of respond to the problem in the way you might have responded to the problem. And so then you feel a bit like you might be out of place, and you can do several things about it. And I'll show you again, people did try to do things about this before the incident happened, but unfortunately they were not successful. So I'm going to go through a worked example. Why is culture important? And hopefully my example will show you that. Then we're going to go to our process safety management tool. And Charlie and I will try to do an interactive session there to help you understand the different questions, how you might assess where you are on that element. And then I'm going to go through briefly how you might formulate a closure plan using the tool. Okay, so I'll just try.
March 23rd, 2005. 15 people were killed and 180 injured during a series of explosions at the BP refinery in Texas City, Texas. The U.S. Chemical Safety Board launched an investigation into the accident and, in its final report, noted organizational and safety deficiencies at all levels of the BP Corporation.
The disaster 1 decade ago at BP Texas City was the most serious refinery accident ever investigated by the CSB.
So I don't want to show you much more than that, but you can see from the investigation that the CSB found serious process safety failings. I'm going to go back to the slides now, and I'll talk to you about what those might have been. And I've taken these from the CSB report. And then I will show you how perhaps some of the elements which we might expect to be developing within the culture element could have been underplayed by the behavior of the management and other teams which were supposed to support the BP Texas City refinery team. So there's three main elements within the culture. The first one is maintain a dependable practice. Within this, we should establish process safety as a core value. So that means that we need to develop that as a core value. We need to tell people that that's important to us. And then not only do we need to tell people that process safety is important to us, we need to behave like it's important to us, right? So if I say, I'm going to go on a diet and it's really important for me to lose weight, and then all of a sudden I start eating a donut and sitting on the couch, you're not really going to believe what I'm saying. And so it's really important to not only say what you mean, but also behave as if you say it, as if you mean it. We need to provide strong leadership. So it's no good for the operators to believe that you have process safety is really important, because actually most of the time it is really important for them. They're the ones on the front line, and they're the ones who may be impacted by an incident. We need the leadership team to be supporting them in this and to demonstrate to others who may influence the operator's behavior, the maintenance team's behavior, the engineer's behavior, demonstrate to them that process safety is important. Establish and enforce high standards of performance. If you accept second best, third best, fourth best in some parts of process safety, you are going to fail, right? You need to strive to be the best, and then to be better than you were yesterday and better than that the next day. And if you continue to do that, continue to strive to be better, to close your gaps, to improve, you will be able to be demonstrating to the front line that process safety really is important for you. It's very similar. I've worked on a lot of sites where it's like, well, yesterday we did 20,000 barrels. Today we want to do 20,000 and a half. Tomorrow we'll do 21,000. Yes, we've hit a milestone. We've done 22,000. We haven't done that for 6 months. Or we've produced 400 days without having a shutdown. Those are the sort of things that you want to be celebrating as well in process safety. It starts driving standards higher, driving people to improve their performance. We need to document the process safety culture, emphasis, and approach. So I'm here, I'm talking to you about process safety. I'm really passionate about it, and I'm walking the talk, and it's really important. And then the next day, my mother dies, or something else horrible, some other family event which is completely unrelated to the site, and I'm not there for 6 months. How are you going to maintain that culture on the site if I'm your senior leader? It needs to be documented, and it needs to be something that somebody else could pick up if something happened. And also, you know, if somebody in the refinery is trying to understand why you're behaving the way you are, or why you're driving that, how can they support you? You can give them this document and say, yep, this is why I'm doing this, and this is how you can support me. The next element is develop and implement a sound culture. We need to maintain a sense of vulnerability. As soon as you start getting overconfident, that's when you make a mistake. My daughter's learning to ride her bike at the moment, and the most worrying time for me was not when she kept falling off her bike. The most worrying time for me was when she just started not to fall off her bike, because I knew then that she might become a little bit overconfident. She might go a bit faster than she could allow for in the braking system, not understanding the concept of a bike. And that's what we're talking about here. You need to remember that your process safety performance is very vulnerable. You can just make one mistake. Hopefully it will be more than one if you've done all the elements correctly, but you could make a mistake, and if you don't respond correctly, people aren't trained well, or if your safeguards are not performing the way they should, you can still have an incident. And this is quite a fragile balance. And, you know, for example, there was a recent incident in India, and they were operating a styrene tank there. That tank had been in operation since 1962. It had been in operation in a styrene service for more than 30 years, but they'd not once had a release of styrene gas. And then 30 years later, they have a massive release of styrene gas and killed 12 people and sent 20,000 people to the hospital. It is a fragile thing, process safety performance, but with good practice and good practice in all the elements, you can have several barriers in place to help keep you safe and to help recover from things which may be a little bit unexpected. We need to empower individuals to successfully fulfill their safety responsibilities. A really good example of this is on the Piper Alpha incident. So I was talking to a colleague today about that, actually, and one of the adjacent platforms, they could see the fire in the night, as it was later termed. They could see the fire on Piper Alpha. They knew it wasn't the flare. They knew it was a major accident, but yet they were still exporting high pressure gas to the facility because they didn't feel empowered to stop production. They knew that that gas was fueling the fire. And that was one of the things that ultimately contributed to the platform going into the sea. And quite a few of the fatalities happened with people who were in the accommodation block. They were still alive when the accommodation block went into the sea. They were writing letters to their loved ones in the accommodation block as they were falling through down to the ground. So being empowered to perform your safety responsibilities is key in having a good sound culture. If you're afraid to perform your safety responsibilities for some reason, because of retribution for some other topic, then you might be reluctant to do it, and time could be of the essence. Defer to expertise, right? One of the key sort of competencies when you become a chartered engineer in any institution is knowing your limits and knowing when to go and talk to somebody else. Process safety is no different. If you need an expert to come in to help you with your bow ties, to help you with your hazard identification, to help you with a particular problem solving, don't try and plow ahead if you don't have the expertise within your organization. Phone somebody. There are loads of people willing to help, and I know sometimes cost can be an issue, or you don't actually know what you don't know. So really trying to be aware, understanding your organizational limits, maybe trying to close the gaps in your organizational limits. That will really help you have a good sound culture. Trying not to pressurize people to doing things that they're not competent for. And also the other thing that comes into there is, I've seen several times where people have come to me for advice, and then they don't like my answer. So then they go to my colleague who's also a process safety engineer, or someone else who works in my team, and they've asked their advice. And 90% of the time, their advice has been the same as mine. And so they get two answers they don't like. So then they go to my manager and ask his advice. And fortunately, I've already briefed him. So his advice is the same as mine. And then they realize they can't work around. But there can be sometimes a culture which is like that people don't want to hear the answer they don't want to hear. You know, if they need to do extra work, if they need to put in extra mitigations, they don't want to do that, even if they hear that advice from an expert. Ensure open and effective communications. So this comes back to what we discussed in the previous part, maintain a dependable practice. If you're blaming people, if people feel like there might be serious repercussions for being open and honest, they may not communicate with you. If you are a good news manager, and this means that whenever you get good news, you tell people how wonderful they are, and you have a really happy, smiley approach to things, you always want to see green on all the charts. I mean, yes, you think you might be encouraging good performance, but actually, if when you receive bad news, you act like a bear with a sore head, you don't like to see any reds, why is this, and you behave in a very aggressive way, it can actually cause people to not want to report any bad news to you. Your behavior as a leader, or your leader's behavior towards the organization, can really influence how process safety culture is in your facility. Establish a questioning or learning environment. So I've been in a lot of environments where people are not allowed to ask questions or they feel that they're not allowed to ask questions, because it then shows that they don't know the answer. You know, when I go to a site, regardless of whether I know the answer or not, I always ask the question and ask people to explain. And if they don't know the answer, I don't make them, or I try my best. I don't know if I achieve always, but I try my best to make sure they don't feel like I'm condescending them when I tell them the answer. I try to work out the solution together so that we feel like it's a team and they feel like they're learning with me rather than I'm telling them what to do. And also sometimes I don't know the answer, so perhaps we might go together to find out the answer, find out who the right person is, perhaps do some research and then talk them through my thought process. So we feel like we're a team. I'm starting to foster that sort of learning and inquisitive nature of the people that I'm working with, so that they're always trying to find out something new. Also, when I go to meetings, I'm always trying to share something new that I might have learned the previous week, the previous day, or something that I learned a long time ago, which might be applicable to the scenario we're in. Fostering mutual trust. Trust is a funny thing, right? You can't have trust until you earn trust. And then how do you earn trust if you don't have time? Trust is not something that comes immediately, but the biggest factor in trust is whether you demonstrate to people that you're listening to them. If, for example, you do listen to them, but you decide to do something which is against their advice, and you don't explain to them why you've decided that could come across to them as if you're not listening to them. And then they won't trust you. They won't tell you anything anymore, because they'll think, well, it doesn't matter what I tell you, you're not going to listen to me. And so then a distrust will develop. Also, for example, if, which may be completely unrelated to process safety, if during your performance reviews, during the whole year, you give really positive feedback to all your employees because you don't like giving bad news, as is the culture in some countries. People don't like to be confronted with bad news. And you leave the bad news until the very last second when you've done all the performance assessments. And while somebody's got to have a lower performance assessment than somebody else. And so some people think, I've done really well this year. My manager's been super happy with me. He hasn't told me I have to improve anything. And then right at the last minute, you're giving a low score and you think, why didn't you talk to me about it? I don't understand. What is this? And then he says, oh, your performance has been really bad all year. And you just feel like, what, you lied to me all year? So trust is about the whole part of your organization and about your culture. And with process safety, you need to have a trust element, because often the things that are raised in process safety have significant production impacts. So for example, if there's a pipe leaking on one of your key process units, if you need to take a shutdown to repair that pipe, or even if you need to put on a wrap, that's going to require a small shutdown. And if you need to replace it, be a bigger shutdown. If people don't trust that you'll listen to them, or don't trust that you won't be blamed if something, if, you know, for example, it's not a leak, it's condensation on the line because it's been really humid outside and the line is cold, they don't trust that there will be a good response, or that you'll give them the support, they may not report it. And actually it might not be condensation, it might be an actual leak. So fostering mutual trust is really important. And then provide timely response to process safety issues and concerns. This comes up time and time and time again in incident reports. There was loads of process safety actions. They were not resourced, they were not closed. Oh no, that project was initiated. Oh, and then it was cancelled because there was no money, there was no resources. Providing a timely response to process safety issues and concerns is critical. And as a leader, you would play a significant role in this. You know, knowing how many process safety actions need to be closed that year is important. How many engineers do you need? Do you need to bring in a team to close a small gap? What about updating procedures, which would be another process safety action? Are they up to date? Do you have enough operators to be able to update them while you're operating? Or do you need to bring a team in so that they can do a draft and then your operators can read afterwards? Making sure that you provide sufficient time and resources to close process safety issues is really important. And that is part of walking the talk, demonstrating as a leader, you have, sorry, I'll just stop that. Demonstrating as a leader that you have commitment to process safety. The next one is monitoring and guiding the culture. None of us are perfect. And unfortunately, even when you have the dream team, it's not going to last forever. People are going to change roles. They're going to move on for family reasons, maybe for career progression reasons. And then you're going to have a new person in your team. Your culture of the team may change. The person who comes in may be a really strong personality, or the person who's leaving may have been a strong personality who is really contributing to your culture and making a really positive change. The new person coming in might not have that strength of character, and the team will take some time to adjust. But actually, that's not a problem. The problem is when you don't know that this adjustment is required, you don't know that this gap is starting to develop in your culture, that is when the problem arises, because then that can perpetuate for a long time without any correction. So it's really important to monitor and guide the culture. That means provide continuous monitoring of performance and then make improvement measures. So again, that might be raising, as we said before, a new process safety concern and then closing that out. It might be a competency gap with the new person who's come in. Perhaps there's a new team of recruits and they need their competence developed. All of these things are really important and they need to be developed. So keeping a good eye and monitoring the performance is important. So coming back to our example, all right, I know this slide is really busy and you're not going to be able to read everything at once, so don't stress. We're going to go through it step by step, and we're going to come back to some of the things we've talked about. The particular ones I want you to think about when I go through this is fostering mutual trust and establishing a questioning and learning environment, and then also ensuring open and effective communications. All right, so we have a timeline here, and this is leading up to the incident at Texas City, which kills 15 people, and as we heard on the video, injures 180 people. All right, the refinery was shut down for a significant period of time, and that unit was shut down for even longer. there was billions of dollars lost in the output of the refinery, as well as a large impact on BP's share price, which wiped a large proportion of their value. So if we come back now, so we're coming back 15 years, right? The first event I want to bring you to, so on the top of this is sort of what was happening at site, right? So if I was an operator at site or I was an engineer at site, these are probably the things that I would be aware of. Yeah, so this is what I'm aware of, because this is my day-to-day. This is what I'm doing day-to-day, right? This along the bottom here is what the senior management or the sort of people who might be a bit removed from the operation, this is what they are telling the front line to do. So these people here had the opportunity to listen to these things. And if they were hearing these things, we'll see what they were doing. But we can try and think about if there is some mutual trust here. Okay, so the first event that happened is Amoco proposes removal of the blowdown stack. So in Texas City, there was a blowdown stack on the ISOM unit. It had an overfill, and then from that overfill, there was a large gas cloud, and it was ignited by a nearby truck. The unit which caused the overfill of the blowdown unit was a refinery splitter. So it was an isomerization unit. It split different products along the top of the column. So you put heat in the bottom of the column, and then the vapors evaporate and they condense at different levels within the column. And then there's different offtakes to take the different products. Now, normally the level within these units is kept relatively low. It's below all of the trays in the column. And so if you think of the column as 20, 30, 40, 50 foot high, the level in that is going to be less than 10% of that column. But on the day of the incident and subsequent previous incidents, this column was overfilled with liquid. There was more liquid in it than should have been, and this level of liquid was so high, it actually went to the top of the column and went out the gas outlet and into the relief header, which then went to a blowdown stack. So normally blowdown stacks in today's kind of engineering would be routed to a flare system, and the flare system allows you to route the gases to a safe location, i.e. away from the unit and away from people. And in some cases, it allows ignition of the gas so that the gas becomes sort of non-hazardous material, such as carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, etc. So when Amoco here proposes the removal of the blowdown stack, they're proposing the blowdown stacks be removed and replaced with flare connections, so that any gases or other coming off the top of the column into the flare or emergency header are routed to a safe location, and they are ignited and burned in a safe manner so that they cannot cause a hazard to the rest of the plant. Just a year later, Amoco cancels the project to remove the blowdown stacks. In that same year, a similar stack has been cited by OSHA, which is the Safety Council in America, as unsafe. And when that happens, then Texas City has been required to investigate whether they should be replacing that stack. That's the same year as they've cancelled the removal of the stack. The following year, Amoco proposes a new project, but it is also cancelled the same year. So again, probably in light of this finding from OSHA, they've proposed a new project to remove all the blowdown stacks and route them to flare, but then they decided there wasn't enough money and they cancelled the project. In '94, we have 3 incidents on the isomerization unit. One is an overfill incident which lifts the relief valves. Another one is a leak, and another one is the relief valve opening because of a high pressure, which is not related to overfill. In that year, Amoco decides to cut staff to reap cost savings in the future. So they've had 3 major incidents where there's been a gas release which have a potential for ignition and fatality. And in that same year, they decide to cut staff costs and reap benefits. In 95, the isomerization unit again overfills and results in a large gas cloud, no ignition, no fatalities. In 1996, a staffing review identifies staffing as critically low. So that could be low, so low that it's unsafe to operate the plant, so low it's unsafe, it's not possible to maintain all the equipment which is required to be maintained to run a refinery. In 1997, the blowdown replacement project is initiated. The blowdown drum is replaced for the isomerization unit, so they actually do work on the vessel which is involved in the incident, but they don't connect it to flare. So the drum itself is taken out, a new drum is put in place for whatever reason, but they don't take this opportunity when the system is down, it's hydrocarbon free, to connect the vent to flare. The next year is 1998. They have the isomerization unit HAZOP, so they re-HAZOP the facility, and they have a fire at the isomerization unit. So during the HAZOP, one of the key things to do is to have a look back at past incidents, and we can see just in the previous 4 years, they've already had 5 incidents. The HAZOP doesn't even identify these 5 incidents as having an influence on the design. And so they miss an opportunity here to make an improvement to the system. And then the second thing that happens is the blowdown stack for the isomerization unit catches fire, which means there's hydrocarbons in there. For some reason, during an electrical storm, that unit catches fire. That very same year, just at the end of the year, Amoco is bought out by BP. And so now, from now on, we're into a BP operation, so different management. In 99, we have an isomerization vapor cloud. So the blowdown drum overfills again, but this time to a sewer. So in this case, it was over the top, but this one, there was a sewer connection was left open and the vapor went into the sewer rather than going out the top. And there was a very large gas cloud. Fortunately, not ignited, no fatalities. In the same year, so this is only 5 years after significant budget cuts, BP has instructed Texas City Refinery to cut the budget by 25%. In 2001, there is a presentation on process safety as well as a process hazard analysis audit. The presentation was titled Process Safety Challenge, and it highlighted to management with a warning of killing someone in the next 4 years. So some people on the facility were aware of the process safety challenges, and they said, if we don't do something about it, we're going to kill somebody in the next 4 years. The process safety management audit finds that actions are not closed out in a timely manner from process safety studies. So again, they've got 2 really good warning signs here that there could be something wrong. BP, in the same year, issues the Process Safety Integrity Management Standard. They issue a really clear standard stating the requirements for good process safety management. And so this is what I mentioned about talking the talk. So here they're talking to say process safety is really important to BP and we need to change the way we do things for good business. In 2002, there is a budget cut review and new project. So in 2002, the refinery decided to do a study, have a look at how much budget they have compared to how much budget they had 10 years ago. And they find out that the budget has been cut 84% since 1992 with no regard to maintenance and budget requirements. So when they've made all these cuts, they haven't made any account of what the actual requirement is at the facility, how much money you actually need to run this specific facility. They've just required blanket budget cuts. Again, another project is initiated to connect the blowdown stack to the flare. A project is launched and cancelled with 2002-2003. In 2003, there was a maintenance gap identified and a second HAZOP was completed on the ISOM unit. There's major gaps at Texas City inspection of the ISOM blowdown unit, which shows internal damage and no accident taken. So they've done an internal inspection of the blowdown unit. During that, they found some significant damage to the internals, probably from liquid overfill, which generally damages internals for gas-filled systems. But instead of taking any corrective action, they've just decided to close the unit up and put it back in service. Now, if you watch the full video on Texas City or see some of the supporting information, you'll find that one of the things that failed on Texas City is the level indicator in this blowdown drum. And I suppose one could theorize that the internal damage here could have impacted the performance on that instrument, although we don't know, it doesn't say for sure in the report. This HAZOP, which is now the second HAZOP that's been done, also fails to learn from incidents, despite there having been a further 2 incidents since the previous HAZOP. And they failed to put modifications to the drum. In 2003 as well, there are profit concerns raised, and they initiate a new project on the refinery to improve the profit margins of the facility, because BP have raised concerns that this refinery is not as profitable as some of the other refineries in the group. In 2004, there is a presentation highlighting that there have been 23 deaths over 30 years on Texas City refinery, really highlighting that there are some serious process safety concerns on the facility, and this was given to the management at the site. In the same year, there is a big celebration by a senior executive who visits the site, celebrating its best ever recordable injury frequency. So again, we spoke about this in the previous presentation. Good personal safety performance does not necessarily mean good process safety performance, as we can see here. And sometimes almost always sole focus on personal safety performance with disregard for process safety performance actually makes process safety performance worse, because you're not even looking at this and it just carries on ticking over, despite you feeling really good about your safety performance because of the personal safety achievements. In 2005, we're now at the beginning of the year, the beginning of the quarter, when the explosion will happen and those 15 people will lose their lives. There is a report from a team who've been invited to assess the culture and the process safety performance on the site, probably as a result of this presentation. There's a report that comes out from them, and there's also the business plan, which states something about process safety. So first, the business plan. The business plan states the refinery will kill someone in the next 18 months. So someone has felt the need to put that in the business plan as a way of trying to communicate to these people who keep putting pressures on cost, etc., on the refinery, trying to communicate to them that there is a serious problem at this refinery. And then this TELOS report, which is also in the supporting information, which is available for this module, it states serious cultural issues, and it goes into a lot of detail about lack of following procedures, permits, etc. And then in the end of that quarter, only 3 months later, the explosion happens at Texas City, killing 15 people. So if we go back to what we were trying to think about here, fostering a mutual trust. We've had several incidents where there have been a significant potential for loss of life on this one unit in the facility, as well as us knowing that there have been 23 deaths over 30 years on this facility from process safety incidents. But all the while, from management, all they're hearing about is this facility is too costly, we need to save money, we need to reduce staff. we've heard that process safety is important, but again, none of the actions taken by the teams who were managing the facility reinforced that message. So you can see perhaps why the team who were working at BP at the time, or Amoco, did not exactly feel safe potentially raising issues higher up, because they felt it wasn't going to be listened to, maybe. And also you can see maybe why they didn't actually trust that it would be listened to. So if I make a big noise, I might lose my job, right? And is anything going to change? No, probably not. And actually things might be worse, because I know what the problem is here, and I can take personal action to manage that proactively within my role. But if I'm fired, that actually might make the situation worse, because they'll bring somebody in who doesn't know, and that might make a more dangerous situation. So this trust here, you can see there's quite a disconnect between that. And then there is an expertise, defer to expertise. So there were several warnings from experts saying that there was a problem at this facility. If you consider that the people who were running the facility, making these presentations, they were the experts in process safety at that facility. They knew what was happening. They could see what was happening. But did the senior management listen? No, it appears not. And it had disastrous consequences. Charlie, is there anything you want to add here? Something you want to ask, demonstrate about culture?
Basically, the comment that I want to make is that sometimes culture is not something tangible. It's not something that people have some sort of technical perception, but here we can see a clear consequence of our lack of culture, our lack of vision from a cultural point of view. That's why it's so important, and it's becoming more and more a hot spot now for many organizations that realize that culture at the end is giving them benefits on all the possible ways. It's from a process safety point of view, from an economical point of view, from a financial point of view, from a process point of view, is really having a huge impact.
Yeah, I mean, the saying goes, and I see it time and time again on LinkedIn, a workforce which is trusted and engaged and feel valued will go the extra mile. They will do more. They will help your productivity, your bottom line. Well, actually, if I was working at the Texas City refinery during this time, I'm not really sure I would feel a very valued member of the team. Yeah, I might feel that my life was in danger just going to work. So then would I feel like I was very valued, that my life was important? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah. And as Charlie said, culture is not always something that it's not something that you can put your finger on and say, you know, this is it. And sometimes actually when you're in the culture, it can actually be quite difficult to see the culture. And so sometimes it can be useful to bring in external people. And I think one of the most valuable things on a site to figure out how the culture is going is to interview your newest employee. Yeah. And hopefully they are somebody who can speak up, but actually listen to what they say. You know, ask them questions about, do you think that we follow procedures here? What do you feel about the culture? How do you feel? If they're just answering straight up positive answers all the time, that could ring alarm bells, because potentially they're just trying to fit in with the herd and trying not to say anything negative. And if they are actually saying something negative, and they're brave enough to say something negative after only a month or maybe 2 months, then yeah, listen, because they might be seeing something you can't see because you're blind to it because you're in there. All right. So
just before we move on, I want to mention something that happened, especially when we go for audits, certain organizations, and they talk about having in many cases a good level of culture. One thing that happened quite often is we always ask if the incident report or the observation report is something where people write their names. In many cases, we find that there are many organizations that people ask to be anonymous. They don't want to show their name. That is a first signal that shows exactly the culture of that place. When people doesn't want to show their names, is because they are feeling that they are afraid to be blamed, or they are afraid to be, let's say, this kind of person that is the whistleblower, if you want, just showing what's wrong, and they don't want to show that. That's a, let's say, like a small signal of how your culture is.
Yeah, and another signal might be that you are never ever seeing any bad news.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
If you are only getting good news, then hey, you are not listening, right? Because there is always some, at these types of facilities, there's always something to improve, always, right? So if you're not hearing any, I need to improve this, I think we should focus on this, you know, I'm not sure we have sufficient resources to do this job, but I think it's really important for the safety of the plant, or whatever. If you're not hearing those types of comments, that means that those discussions are still happening, but they're just not reaching you. And there might be a reason they might be being squashed down in sort of a middle management area, because they want to be seen as really good performers, maybe for career progression. I've recently been involved with a company, and when I had a look at their Google reviews, they have 5 stars on Google. And then I had a quick look through their reviews, and they had something like 30 reviews. 10 of them were 1-star reviews, but they had all been discredited as not true customers, which again is a ringing alarm bell to me. So what if someone starts to say that your performance is bad, they're just not a customer, and I'm not going to learn from it, because we're just so wonderful here. It's a sign that you're not listening, you're not a learning organization. So make sure that you look for the bad news, that you don't celebrate bad news, but you definitely do not punish those who bring the bad news. And just remember that everybody comes from different backgrounds. You might have people of different cultures, and it might be quite acceptable for you to raise your voice in your culture, and then the next minute for everything to be okay. But that might not be acceptable to another culture or another individual. And if you raise your voice to them, that might stick with them for a long time, and it might influence their behavior towards you. Okay, so these are the 3 main elements we need to focus on. Maintaining a dependable practice. That means we actually have given some commitment. Everybody knows what we're working towards, and there is something that they can pick up, and they can know what their role is, and they can show others and demonstrate to others what their role is. The second one is developing and implementing a sound culture. That means that you're continuing to learn. You are developing a trust all the way through the organization so people can report. And then the last one is monitoring and guiding the culture. Don't rest on your laurels. Even if you think your culture is great, there's always room to improve, and things change. So don't assume that what's good now is going to stay good for the future. So now we're going to pop out of here, and we're going to go over to the process safety tool, and we're going to walk through the different questions that you need to answer in the tool for this element. And Charlie and I are going to have a sort of interactive role play here to try and see how we could determine where we are on the scale. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm just going to make sure I'm sharing the right screen so that you can see it. So Charlie, just confirm that you can see it.
We can see it. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go to that first element here. So just a reminder of the different categories. So for anybody who didn't attend the first webinar or hasn't watched the introduction to the tool, we have N for no process. That means that until we read this questionnaire, we didn't really actually know this was a thing, and we've got nothing in place. There's not even a start of a process. The P means the process is under development. So we know it's a gap. We're starting to work on a solution, but the solution isn't implemented yet. So we're on the under development. C means it's under implementation, i.e. it has resources, you're actually working towards it, but it's not done yet. And S means that the process has been implemented, it's sustainable, it has a learning element to it. So these are the the 4 different categories. And then we have 3 questions to answer for each of these items. The first one is, how is it done? So is it defined how it's done? Does everybody know what they're doing and what each different person should be doing? Who is responsible? So is that defined? You're not going to wake up the next morning and go, hey, does so-and-so know he's supposed to be maintaining the valve on reactor X? And he goes, oh no, he doesn't work at this facility. Is the person who's responsible know he's responsible? Has he been trained to do the thing that he needs to do? Does he have the competence? Does he have the supervision required? Is that person there? And then, as we said before, we need to guarantee that it is done, right? Trust is nice, but knowing is better, right? And with process safety, I want to know that it's done. The consequences of getting this wrong are severe. I want to know, and so should you. You should want to know that this is done. So we need an independent person, someone who's not responsible, to be guaranteeing the work is done. And then when we put these scores together, we will get a result here. So Charlie and I, we're going to read the element, and then I'm going to ask him some questions, and he's going to give me some answers, and I'm going to try and figure out where he is on the scale. And by the time we've walked through all 20 elements, we'll have an evaluation. You'll be able to see what the results will look like on a piece of paper in the graph. Right, so the first question I'm going to ask you, Charlie, is do you have a document with an HSC and process safety policy statement signed by the managing director or chief executive of your facility?
We usually have a policy in the organization that we use as an example. We have a policy that is considering HSC. It is not stating in a clear manner that is covering process safety. How that's supposed to be. In that case, I pass. In that case, it's a little bit tricky.
I mean, Charlie, I think you have got a document stating HSE, but our requirement is that it also needs to state process safety policy. And if it's not clearly stating process safety policy, I'm afraid I'm going to have to put you on an N, no process in place.
Perfect. This is something to mention to everyone that is watching the video, that is a bit tricky. However, the reason behind this is that process safety brings some extra requirements from a competence point of view, from a budget point of view, and from other aspects as well.
Yeah, and if it's not supported by the senior management, you are very unlikely to be able to fight the corner to get that resource and competence. Yeah, and also, as we mentioned in the first webinar, is there can be a conflict of interest if you're trying to get someone potentially with a responsibility for production, giving them the same responsibility for process safety, because there will be definitely scenarios where there's a conflict between their primary responsibility, which is maximizing production, and their secondary responsibility, which is ensuring good process safety. All right, Charlie, so we know you have a policy, but if it doesn't say process safety, I'm not going to be able to say that you know who's responsible. And I'm also not going to be able to say that you have somebody to check it's done, because you're not committed to it in your organization.
It's important to mention that law is to show us the results of this assessment, is to show us where we need to focus our efforts. It's not to show what is wrong or what is right.
Yeah. And also an important thing to mention here is we could still be relatively low if we had a document that stated process safety policy, but if I then asked Charlie a following question like, oh, so you have a statement that says process safety policy, do you have the resources within your facility to deliver the process safety policy? And if he's then answering no, that means we don't have any responsible. And even if we have someone checking, they're unable to do their job. So again, that might be a no. So it's not just a case of having the piece of paper there. You need to have the systems in place to support that.